We'll go ahead and start to transition now to our keynote, and I'm honored this morning to have a very, very esteemed panel of people who I look up to as both mentors and I know that one day they hope to have a media platform as successful as Higher Ed AV is. I know that that's their dream in life. But it's their people who I have always looked up to and model what I do for my brand and our people, and with both personally and Higher Ed AV. And so this is just an honor for me to have you all. So before I kind of set the stage, and what's going on here? People are calling me. Quit calling me. I need to pause. Here we go. All right, focus. That's what they call it in here. Focus. All right. I want to go around. I want to just have you all just introduce yourselves, what you do, who you're with, and all that good stuff. So I'm just going to go right around the horn according to my screen, and that puts Mr. Tim Albright first.
My name is Tim Albright. I am the host of AV Week podcast that covers the industry. And I think technically my title now on AV Nation is CEO. So, yeah.
Well, it's quite a pleasure. And of course, you all know he is the reason we have this wonderful award over here of the best virtual event for 2021.
Well, I would actually say that you guys are the reason that you have that. So
well, possibly. Yeah, I guess
I don't do anything. That's the one thing that people don't. I have no control over that thing. I had people texting me this year asking who was ahead, and we had ownership change about a year ago, and we've got a team that does that now. And I literally could not find out without sending a couple of Teams messages. So.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much. Next up on my screen, Cindy Davis. Thank you for joining. Tell everyone who you are.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Cindy Davis. I am the content director and brand director for AV Technology, which is owned by the overall brand of Future. Our sister publication is SCN and SBC.
Great. Thank you very much. And of course, right here, we have my wonderful cover of AV Technology right there. I think Frank Alimo, who's also on this call, has one of these too. So not as special as I think, but that's okay. Thank you very much, Cindy. And Dan, thank you for joining. Please tell everyone who you are.
Thank you for having me. My name is Dan Ferrisi. I'm editor-in-chief of Commercial Integrator. I've been here at Commercial Integrator for about 3 months now. Prior to that, I had been with Sound and Communications in various capacities for close to 17 years. So I've been in the industry and covering the industry since 2004, but super excited now to be doing it, waving the flag of Commercial Integrator.
Great. Thank you very much for being here. And one thing that, I'm not pointing to a Commercial Integrator, a trophy over here. I set my AV Mag one here just because, well, I felt like I had to put 3, but this is where I'm going to use the reason I don't have one to set up our conversation. Context for it is, and I've told this story before, 6 years ago when I moved from kind of live entertainment into higher ed, I showed up at 6 years ago, showed up at Infocom. So I was at Cal Baptist. I had the little, education badge, the little green strip, and no one would talk to me. They would, they kind of push you aside, and it's integrators talking to manufacturers and resellers, and it's kind of like there's this club, and then you guys can go play over there. Fast forward a few years later, we're starting to get invited. People are starting to talk to us. Now we go to Infocom, and it's sign the NDA, let's go to a hush room and have bigger conversations. We've seen that grow for the higher ed vertical, and this is kind of the purpose behind HETMA, is being able to advocate for our industry. Now, that said, and I know this happened before you were at Commercial Integrator, but I should have 2 Commercial Integrator trophies, actually, because we had a higher ed integration project that was given to an integrator for our project that only did 11 of the 400 rooms, and they got the award, probably because they submitted for it, right? And then Also, Crestron had case study of the year, right, last year. So for my study. So there you go. But that said, I'm going to open this up to you then. What is it outside looking in? We've traditionally had the channels talking to one another. There's still this sense of, and this is coming from Commercial Integrator, your brand itself says Integrator. How has this started to change? How are you seeing as in-house integrators and tech managers kind of grow and adapt? And how are you guys addressing that? I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. And what I can say is historically, Commercial Integrator hasn't been around, 65 years like Sound and Communications was. It was born about, 11 years ago, something like that. And the raison d'etre of the publication is to help integrators run their businesses better. The idea was there wasn't a publication or a platform that was centered not on case studies per se, not on applications, but about how to make integrators run their businesses better. So we are very much rooted in the idea of the integration channel and AV integrators as third-party businesses who are hired and brought on for design and integration and service and things of that nature. There is some evolution going on. I pulled the stats. We're right now about 10% of our audience would be quote end users or working for end user organizations. That's not nearly as large as Sound and Communications was. When I left Sound and Communications, it was over 40%, but that was a more application focused publication as compared to, again, CI being about business best practices for integration companies. But 10% is not an insignificant number, and it's certainly going up. So I think at some point you have to stipulate to reality, which is that, especially in the higher education sphere, as you say, but also in other verticals that we cover, there are organizations who have incredibly built out teams, like your team, that are fully capable of executing projects without needing necessarily to bring in a third party for every aspect of it. What I would say is that, and I think, we talked about this last week, there are almost certainly in almost every institution, almost every application, there almost certainly is a place for an integrator to come, whether it's, whether it's pulling wire, whether it's helping with design, whether it's service, whatever the case is, there is a place for integration firms. And I believe that strongly. I don't feel like they're ever going to be outmoded in any vertical. But I do think Commercial Integrator will recognize the fact that teams like yours are just as technically adept sometimes as these third-party integrators are, and they're controlling and doing a whole lot of work, millions of dollars of work in high-class facilities, and they're doing much the same as some of these third-party integrators that we celebrate and cover every month are doing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and I think that's really an interesting stat because when we had our prep meeting, last week, you didn't know the number yet. You were going to look it up, and it being only 10% actually surprises me that it's low, and maybe it's because of the direction of that your publication focuses, which then I'll move over to Cindy now. Yours is end user based, right? You're focused on that, and kind of talking about your sister company of SCN, and I've said this before, puts out a top 50 integrators list every year, and I said if USC were allowed to be considered an integrator, we would fall in the 30s, right? With the amount of spend and work we do, we could be listed. Now, I know there's other things. Not every company submits. There's a lot with that. But that said, you're focused on end users now in your publication. Where is that difference? Where's the difference, from where Dan was saying, or do you see these same trends? And the way we work with that, and that's very open-ended. I'm going to stop talking.
No, that's okay.
That's why you're the expert.
I actually started writing about the end user at Tech Decisions, which is Dan's sister publication. So I developed the Tech Decisions. So I started really writing about the end user back in 2014, and I think we were really seeing that the technology managers weren't really getting a voice. And that's why we developed that and, AV technology. So with AV technology, it's what we're all about. It's sharing ideas, creating inspiration for others. So I think, there's a place for both. whether it's the commercial integrator side, the SCN, side, and AV technology and tech decisions. So I have seen really, I mean, as you've said, in the last 3 years, starting the last 5 years, the in-house integrators, and it's really mostly in higher education. We cover a lot of verticals, corporate, we transportation, retail, and it's really only in higher education are we seeing technology managers that have internal integration teams, which, I always want to ask, as a reporter, I always want to put that back on you guys. Why is it that you have the only vertical that's really got the internal team? Joe?
That is a good question, and I'm looking forward to seeing that go in the chat, because I think there's a lot of conversations there with that. But to give you my side of it, I think it has to do with value proposition. It has to look at where, if you look at an SLA, one thing we always talk about is, we get a phone call. We can't then just call an integrator and say, hey, by the way, come out. Oh, what's your window? 6 hours. No, we've got 5-minute SLA. We've got to be able to see what's going on. We have to be able to hot swap right then, not come out, look at what the decision, then put in the RMA and then be able to hot swap it. And so I think what we're trying to see, and we're starting to see, is that in-house teams are kind of trying to own both sides of it. Like for us personally at USC, we own the design and programming side, like that end, and we own the support side. We might supplement in the middle, because it's not a value proposition for me to keep a full installation team on staff all year round when I only have 3 months to actually do any installs every year, because that's the summer break. That's when I might be able to supplement, and I just keep senior engineers on for that hot swap, that one-off, those things that might need to be done throughout. I think there's a lot of other higher ed institutions that are about similar to me, some more, some less, depending upon the size. I think that's typically what we're starting to see, which then I'll turn to you, Tim. Does that make us a true in-house integration team if we're just picking and choosing what fits us? Or, how are you seeing? I know you've got the whole Fuse platform now where you're focusing on end users. You're traditionally, AV Week has been a conversation between manufacturers and integrators, and now you usually bring in an end user or so every week. Where have you seen this change? Where, do we not deserve the role in business? I don't know. Talk to us.
So a couple of things. So we started, Fuse is in its infancy, and I appreciate you saying it, but it's a platform for technology managers, for folks, the AV users of the world, to chat, to support each other, and to get together. You can shoot me an email, or you can go to fuse.avnation.tv and sign up. I want to answer your question directly, though. And you said, does it not make us integrators if we pick and choose? My day job, right? I mentioned in the chat, this is a new office for me. I am the CMO of CTI, an integrator out of St. Louis, right? You are an integrator if you pick and choose. You are integrators pick and choose, right? If you get a job opportunity for a large stadium project and you don't have the manpower, the woman power, you don't have the resources, you've never done a stadium, you're probably not going to try to get that job. You're going to stick to the lane that you're in and the one that you're successful at, regardless of whether you are at Lewis and Clark Community College, is where I started in the AV industry, a very small community college as a tech manager, or you're at USC, or you're at Boston College, and you are trying to make sure that the 200, 300 rooms that you can support are done. But one of the things that happened when I was at Lewis and Clark is we put up a $25 million nursing facility, had 19 classrooms, and had 13 or 14 lecture halls, several $1 million AV project. Well, guess what? Me and my two folks couldn't do that over the summer, right? It was not physically possible. So yeah, we picked and choose because we wanted to be successful. We wanted the college to be successful. We wanted the installation to be successful. So there are certainly arguments to be made that the in-house integrator or the technology manager or whatever label, the AV users of the world, they are certainly integrators. Now, there are things that they don't have to worry about, and some things that they do that the typical integrator don't concern themselves with. But the notion that because you don't get hired by an outside firm to install doesn't make you an integrator. I think that's a fallacy.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I think that our people would agree with that generally. So with that, how now, and I'll stick with you on this question just to start with. How have you seen, and it's interesting because you started as a tech manager, how have you seen manufacturers mold their messaging now that they're not just having one-on-one conversations with integrators and resellers, and now the end user is part of the conversation?
There are a handful of manufacturers who have done this really well. I'm going to say over the past 20 years. And they started in the education space. They would come to my campus, they'd come to your campus, they'd come to whoever, and they would have these education reps, right? In the world of integrators, these are local manufacturers reps. Well, they started a program specifically for higher education, and they would reach out to us. They would, come in and show us the latest, greatest thing. Sometimes it was under NDA, sometimes it wasn't. A lot of times it was presentations. Sometimes they'd take you to lunch. Sometimes they'd just be walking through, and they would build these relationships. And they were doing what they had done with integrators with the actual decision makers, which with the actual higher education institutions that were writing the check, hoping to pull, right? Instead of pushing it through the integration channel, they were hoping to pull it through the education channel. And now they've seen success with that, and they're starting on the enterprise, right? So now they're reaching out to Google, now they're reaching out to Microsoft, now they're forming strategic alliances and standards with Uber and with these other technology firms and these Fortune 500 companies, because they saw success in the education front. Some of them have government teams as well. But the idea here is to create this pull from the higher education folks to say, hey, look, I just saw this great thing from Extron. I just saw this great thing from Crestron. I just, had a super secret, backdoor meeting at Infocom, and they said this is going to be available next quarter. You should already know about this. Let's have a conversation, right? So they're creating the pull instead of simply relying on their dealers to push it through.
It's interesting though, if I can, Joe, to Tim's point, it's still very interesting that internal integration teams still have to go to the external integrators to purchase. So the manufacturers are very much protecting that integrator channel.
Yes. And all right, is that, you said no to, is that good or bad? I'll throw this out there. Should we be allowed to buy direct? Let's get right to it.
I think you're opening a can of worms that you don't know all the ramifications of it. Now, I say that, understand, Joe and I are on two different spectrums here. And I think I said this in the conversation last week. I worked for Lewis and Clark Community College. Number one, community college, very small, we were not USC. And the story I'll give you is actually from Boston College. And my very first Infocom, little community college tech manager. And the person I met, the head of technology for Boston College, made the reference to the fact that they had just received a pallet of projectors directly from a manufacturer. And what they spent on just that one pallet was like 3 times my annual budget for my entire campus, right? So certainly USC probably could make the case. Joe, you mentioned the fact that you'd probably be in the 30s of the SCN top 50 if you were allowed, right? Okay, sure, we can have that conversation. Boston College, sure, you can have that conversation. You start getting into budgets of 10, 20, 30, $40 million. Possibly there are some things that you could do. You start talking about smaller colleges and with smaller budgets, there's not really, there is a diminishing returns for both manufacturers and the college, right? There are a whole lot of business stuff that I really don't understand all of it. I just know that as you get into smaller and smaller purchases, it's just not worth it.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to Dan now because I want his comment, but also I'm going to give some kind of a side prep. I actually tend to agree. Sorry, I think that all my people are going to hate me. They're going to withdraw membership.
Peterson definitely is going to come for you because he's already.
Yeah. Because here's the thing. I actually don't believe we deserve all of those perks, let's call it, of buying direct until we start treating our departments like businesses. Right. We can hide behind endowments and administrations and things like that without having to take a real risk like an integrator needs to. An integrator has to throw, lines of credit behind things. Now, granted, we have endowments. It's the same, different, whatever.
Whoa.
Money's money. Money is money. I'll put my $8 billion endowment up against.
To come every year. The credit does not.
True. Okay. Well, I don't know. We can fight that, but
I imagine there's still someone, a CFO, making sure that money is spent properly.
Correct. Yes. That is true. So with that, then, so Dan, I mean, is there you're talking all the time to manufacturers, integrators, and all that? Are we wrong as a very specific trade org and vertical to say, treat us the same? Is there a part we're missing, or do we deserve? I mean, I'll let you kind of take it how you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would start by saying is I do believe that teams like yours, teams like many of those who are on this HETMA panel, absolutely deserve the term in-house integrator. I think there's a certain gravitas with the term integrator. So I don't usually use tech team or tech manager or something like that. A team like yours deserves to be called an integrator. It happens to be in-house. So I don't want to use the word deserve, like whether you've reached a certain level, because I respect the level that you've reached and the technical expertise that you have. What I will say is, and I know you said this in our conversation last week, Joe, that as built out as your team is, you do millions of dollars of work with outside integrators every year. I would imagine a lot of the people on this panel do millions of dollars, or at least hundreds of thousands of dollars of work with outside integrators, even if they do have an incredibly established and strong in-house team. So I think that that's kind of a conduit through which those vendor partnerships can still be, an integrator can still deliver those hardware products to you because they have a role to play. It may not be a 100% role, it may be a 15% role or a 20% role in the grand scheme of what your organization is doing, what the educational institution is doing, but you're still using them. And I'm a big believer that you should still continue to use them for some things. There is a role that they can play. And I think part of that role may be the provision of products through vendors from them. What I will say is, just going back to what we were talking, you asked Tim about how manufacturers are kind of shaping their messaging. I feel like one of the things that we have seen is, with the VIXA changing its name, for example, to the Integrated Experience Association, I think people are recognizing that you need to talk not just about specs and speeds and connectors and inputs and outputs, but actually talk about the end user experience. And I think that's going to resonate with the people to whom your organization reports, your in-house integration team reports. They may not be concerned about this connector or that connector, but they're concerned about what is the student experience going to be, what's the professor experience going to be. If a professor walks into the classroom and has to deal with a projector or something like that, is she going to be able to deal with it immediately? Can she go from room to room and it's going to be a similar kind of a setup? She's not going to have to learn about a different kind of a projector or a different kind of a whiteboard every time she walks into a different classroom. So I think that vendors are probably increasingly interested in and cognizant of the fact that the people they're talking to might not be impressed by the display resolution so much as, is this going to give me the classroom experience that I want? And I think their messaging is being shaped more toward the experience and less toward the specsmanship. And, oh, wow, how many numbers can I put on a spec sheet that's going to really impress a tech?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You make a great point. And I think a lot of it, and why there's a lot of in-house work, is because of that standardization, right? I remember when I came to, when I started in higher ed, I went to Cal Baptist, and I tell the story all the time. We had 3 large auditoriums, and literally one of them was an Extron. The next one was a Crestron. The one next to it was an AMX room, because it was just whatever integrator got bid and they got it. And, and the faculty were frustrated because there wasn't a sense of standards. There wasn't a sense of being able to own the entire experience. And I think that's really where the key is. And we've said this internally as our group, is one of the difference between a standard integration company is, and in a way, even manufacturers, is they finish a job and they get to leave. we don't get to leave. We're stuck with whatever happens, and we're stuck dealing with whatever the end position is. So I'll go to you, Cindy, on this, because, is there a different side, even speaking of this as AV technology, where the customer story is also important? What happens with it, the purpose behind it, not just the fact that it was a job done and signed off on and a project closed.
So I think we cover the full scope of it. So from the end user, the customer story, as well as, if there was an integrator on the job. You said, the integrator gets to leave. Good integrators don't leave. Now, if they're a good integration firm, they don't leave. And if you don't, if they do, they'll never get the work again. So I think that's probably unfair. And if you have had an integrator leave, then write them up on Twitter. They should never work again. But as far as the overall project, it is important still, whether you're, I've done many case studies and interviews with all of you folks, and want to do more, by the way. It's about sharing those successes and lessons learned. If you had integrators leave, that's, I would hope actually that would be rare. But I think as far as having the in-house integration teams, I think that's it's so important. And I've been reading the chat, and someone mentioned that you've got 300 or 500 rooms that you have to keep online, and it's dollars lost if a classroom doesn't go happen in 10 minutes. So that's critical. And you're designing the interface. I've been writing about technology, and I started in consumer electronics, and I used to see, oh my gosh, the integrators designed these crazy touch panels that took 20 buttons, or they would have a Star Wars like thing go all around. It's like, and nobody could really see what needed to be done. Especially today, that interface, the user experience needs to be so simple. It always had to be simple, but now you're on the hook as in-house integrators. You want to make sure it's really simple, because you don't want to get called down to that classroom. So those are the stories that I'm also really interested in hearing about. It's like, oh, well, it was just really simple. Well, it's not clearly simple. It's simple for the end user, which it should be. But what was that? What was that thought process? Who were these stakeholders? And that's what I'm also really interested in. Who are those stakeholders that you're talking to every day to ensure that those rooms are easy to use? Whether it's enabling the projector to come on, the lights, the shades, in PTZ cameras, a whole bunch of things. So I think it's that overall, back to Dan's point, it is about the overall experience, but that overall experience starts with the stakeholders at the table.
Yeah. Wow. So good. And I want to throw it back to Dan then on this, because the stakeholders, how can we leverage that? I mean, dealing with this as, a lot of people here on this call, I mean, I know that I'm a unique, I guess I'm not necessarily unique, but we're moving the direction of where we are. There are still a lot of schools that say they want to be, but they're still, 2-3 person teams, right? They don't have all of that. How can you then get to that difference? What are the things that we need to know if we want that spot at the table? How do we look at the whole user experience? If you are a standard, an integrator, is there something too that we bring value that they can't? Because we talk to the true end user, which isn't the true end user is not the tech manager supporting it. True end user is the faculty member in the classroom, right? Very wide open, but right back to you on that.
So the first thing I'll say is I just want to amplify what Cindy said. I would be derelict not to point out what she said, which is that a good integrator will not go away. An integrator is looking for a long-term, multi-year relationship. And I'll just say very briefly, we're doing a profile on a story that CTI did, that the company for which Tim is the CMO, in the March edition. And it's a multi-year project. And because of the strength of how CTI performed on that particular project, they're going to be getting another project with that same institution. So you think about, customer acquisition or client acquisition cost. The best way to bring that cost down is to have such a good relationship with that client that they're not even thinking about sending out an RFP to someone else because they want to work with you. And then they're going to tell their friends and their peers about you. So I think that's what an integrator should strive for. That's what they should strive for. That strong, long-lasting, multi-year relationship where they can't help but to talk about how strong your firm was and what a pleasure it was to work with you. But to your question, Joe, I think for sure an in-house integration team can offer benefits that maybe an outside integrator could not necessarily, just in terms, as you say, the proximity to the professor, the actual access day by day to her or to him, and what their environments are and what their concerns are. I know, I speak to integrators every day, and obviously they're in close touch with the technology managers and the decision makers. That might not necessarily filter down to the individual professors and the students and you're part of the USC body. The community on a face-to-face basis, them by name, you go to social and academic functions with them. It's probably hard for a third-party integrator who may have hundreds of projects going on to have that same kind of face time up and down the certainly, if that's feasible, I would recommend that it get as close as possible to your client to build those kind of long-lasting relationships. But it would be, I think, folly for me to say that there's not a benefit if you're an in-house integration team, big or small, to be on a first name basis and their kids and all that with the people who actually are going to be using the technology and using the rooms every day.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. And I love that. I love that thought because I think that is where we often think there is a difference. We become part of the community. We're often the third parties that we bring out aren't. I will say giving props to a lot of the good, and we have 3 integration companies that are our preferred integrators. We do use others. As I pointed out, even though we do mostly everything in-house, we still spent $10 million in integration last year between, our event and other capital project, everything. So, which is some small amount of money. And it takes good relationships for that to be, for us to be successful. I have to trust the companies I'm still giving money to be part of our family, really, to still be in with us there. So I'll throw this out and I'll go to Tim with you on this. Just pretend we're not really recording. There's really not another 100 people on the call. We're not going to post this publicly later. It's just us. You hear everything. You're in the middle of it all. What does the rest of the industry think of us? What do they think of
you
in-house?
Personally? I can't.
I don't even want to know what they think of me. It would hurt me too much. I would start to cry. What do they think of us as in-house integrators? Us thinking that we are this body that we know we are. But what's the industry say?
I will reflect back what an experience that you had, and also a dear friend of mine, Bradford Ben, had, and when he went from manufacturing, he worked for Harman for maybe 20 years, over to being an end user. He worked for Universal for a few moments, and he had the same experience. Now, here's what's interesting. Bradford is a larger than life person, right? Just in general. If you've never met Bradford Ben, come find me at Infocom. I will introduce you to him because he is a fabulous wealth of knowledge and he is bigger than life. He probably knows more walking into any given trade show booth than the people working the booth. I'm not saying that because he's my friend. I'm saying that because the man has 30 years of experience and he's done damn near everything. Okay. But once he put on that end user badge, people wouldn't talk to him. They wouldn't answer his questions. Now, this was 3 or 4 years ago at Infocom. It has gotten better, and marginally, but it has gotten better. But think about that for a second. The people in the industry, the people that are running those booths, wouldn't give this man who has taught classes, has taught CTS classes, has doled out probably more CTS RUs than I will ever see in my life, wouldn't answer his simple questions about the technology that they were presenting. That's an industry, that was an industry problem, right? Because the people running those booths, it has gotten better. And the reason it's gotten better is because every year when InfoComm happens, every year when ISE happens, they give out the numbers. And I'm not going to argue about what the numbers mean and this, that, and the other, but it's the percentages that I'm looking at, right? And the number of folks that are in the end user column, and yes, Mike Peterson, they don't have an in-house integrator one yet, and you can talk to Dave Labuskas about that if you'd like. But the ones that are given that end user badge, that percentage has grown steadily over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think the industry is seeing that. And I certainly know that, as again, my day job is as an integrator, we have a booth. We had a booth last year at InfoComm. We will have another one in Vegas, right? There's a reason for that. Not because I want Crestron to come to my booth. I don't care if they come to the CTI booth. I care if you come to my booth, right? I care if the folks from UCLA come to my booth, from UNLV.
Never heard of them.
I'll be quiet. But I care if the folks from HETMA come to my booth, right? That's why I'm there as an integrator, because the percentage of in-house integrators and AV users that attend that conference has grown, and we're seeing that as a big block.
I think if I can, I know when I was at Dan's company and with Future, we've also worked with Avixa to help reach those end users to go to InfoComm, because we believe it's really important as well.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that is an important. So let's go to telling our story, connecting to what Chris was talking about. And again, I've got the media powerhouses here. Again, I heard that, and in fact, telling a little story. I was on a call on Monday with someone from another institution, and they kept saying to me, and it was great for my ego, how famous I was and all this stuff. And, it was wonderful. It made my day. But it's actually not the point. The fact is, I'm just this, and I say this all the time, I'm just the stupid one, willing to embarrass myself to get, eyes put on me. And I don't necessarily expect people to do that. But how can other people tell their stories? Like, it might be me getting a case study, but the fact is there are incredible installations out there at small schools that never get seen. How can they tell their story? Cindy, you're waving.
Bring them on. And Joe, by the way, I don't know how you actually do your day job.
I don't.
Because
He doesn't.
You are incredibly generous with your time. You do HETMA, you're on my panels, you're everywhere. So thank you, by the way. So no more Joe Way in AV technology for at least a month. But really, cindy.davis@futurenet.com and on Twitter, I want to share your stories. It's through sharing your stories that help inspire others, because not everyone is on this call or on my panels that I have, which, by the way, next Wednesday, shameless plug. So really, please share your stories. And if you have ideas for like a trouble spot that you're having that you've solved that you'd like to share with others, that's really helpful, because we can get it out through AV Network is the overall site for SEN and AV technology. So all those stories go right on online, and you can search for them and search higher ed. We've got lots of stories, but we need to fill that beast. So really, send your ideas along to me. Reach out. Always happy to hear. And it's no job is too small. I'm not looking for just the USC sized and UNLV sized jobs. Looking for the smallest community colleges, how you made one classroom absolutely shine and you made it really easy for the instructor and the students to engage. Please share those stories.
And I totally agree. I think that is one of the things that we need to do, even just talking off of what Chris was saying earlier, is get our voice out there and share the stories, even tying this together. And I'm going to come back to you, Dan, in a second once I kind of preface this, because it ties into what Tim was saying. Take Mike Peterson on our, one of our esteemed membership chair and one of our steering committee, original steering committee members, was a former CTS holder of the year while at Mechdyne, right? Was allowed to do all the things, his company got all this. Now he comes and builds this team internally at Iowa State. And almost blew that one. See, this is why I am the lesser of the four here. How now, Dan, are you as easy if Mike says, here's my project, here's what I've done, his credentials didn't change. Everyone would listen to him all day long. It's almost the same story Tim was talking about with Bradford, right? While he's CTS holder of the year, not saying people don't listen to Mike, but you get what I'm saying. There's a difference now once he becomes tech manager from, integrator CTS holder. Is it the same thing? Are you looking for those stories? Is it a good way for our vertical to continue to grow our brand, our name?
I mean, I have a ton of respect for Mike, and I'll just mention in my own kind of cheap plug, he's actually part of an Infocom panel I'll be doing in Las Vegas. So I have a lot of respect for him and his expertise. So yeah, I think that potentially is something that could be covered on commercial integrators, platforms. Obviously, as I said at the outset, our raison d'etre is to help integrators run their businesses better. So we are committed to the channel. What we don't want to do is have people read commercial integrator and then think to themselves, oh, 8 or 9 years ago, I would have gotten that job. And now I don't get that job anymore because they're going a different way. So I think it would probably be something where I would look for, much like you do at USC, find ways where end user technology managers, in-house integrators like Mike and his team, and third-party integrators come together to create an outstanding outcome for the client. And I think the outstanding outcome is something that would really resonate, with the people to whom you speak every day, because again, that's what they want. That the teachers want an outstanding outcome, the students want an outstanding outcome, the deans want an outstanding outcome. So I think that would be the angle from a commercial integrator perspective, how all these different interests can merge together, in-house integrators, out-of-house integrators, technology managers, and decision makers to facilitate something like you've achieved at USC and like he's achieved at Iowa State. But what I will say is, and kind of again to amplify what Cindy said, we do have the tech decisions property under the Emerald umbrella. That's 100% targeted to end users, and we share content and mind share back and forth between us. But we, at the same time, we don't want to turn our back on those who made us who we are and those for whom we exist. We exist for the integration channel because we want to guide them and show them the way and focus on service and focus on profitability and focus on pivoting their businesses. But I think engaging with organizations like HETMA and people like you, Joe, and people like Mike can be instructive because it can give them ideas on how to pivot their business. They don't necessarily need to think about, I need to come in and be a one-stop shop and cover 100% of everything, and you're going to be totally dependent on me. If that's the model, you may not do so well in higher education these days. So talking to people like you and exposure to HETMA and your ideas and your in-house integration teams might very well help my integrator readers position themselves for success in your verticals.
Yeah, no, so good. I love that. And so, and I think that's true. And I think that there is a space to like knowing that you speak to a specific audience, right? We don't have to think, okay, we now have to be part of that. There's audiences speak to audiences. HETMA speaks to our audience, our own audiences, ourselves. So first, I'm going to give a question to Tim, but I'm going to open up right now. Everyone, if you have a question, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat. We do want to start having questions, and I'm going to ask one last one to Tim, kind of on the same thing before we get to questions. You run these. So this one right here says AV Professional of the Year.
That would be yes.
And this one is mine. And you've been running the awards, and there have been 3 higher ed tech managers that have now won it, between Justin Dawson, myself, and then this year, Lex Peters. So we're getting ourselves out there, and and at least a number of voters, even if it is all of our student workers, know how great we are. So how can we leverage that? How do we take that platform and then say, okay, but now we deserve the larger AV platform with that?
A couple of ways. Number one, when you're talking to your not just your integration partners, but also the manufacturing, and quite frankly, to Avixa, right? You mentioned the fact that Mike won CTS Holder of the Year. I should have looked this up, and I know at least one technology manager has won that in the last 10, 15 years. More should be winning it, right? Why not? Why don't higher education and even corporate technology managers apply for it? I mean, that first of all, that is the first step, right? Is either you apply for it or you have someone submit it for you. So those of you that are considering that for this coming InfoComm or even the future ones, apply for it. Put yourself out there, and then just honestly, quite frankly, network. Talk with not just your local rep. I mentioned the fact that a lot of manufacturers have education, enterprise, and government reps, again, to pull the draw and to create demand for their products. So start networking with them. One of my kind of oldest and dearest AV friends, I met because he was my education rep for Crestron. Now, he is no longer a rep for Crestron, and I am no longer a tech manager, but we still talk, we still chat. I saw him down in Dallas, not too long ago, and I'll see him in a couple of weeks. But you make sure that you are, networking. And the one thing I'll say about networking that kind of goes back to a little bit of what Neto said is when you're networking, the end goal there is not, you're not networking to use people. You have to be genuine, right? I genuinely, the people that I connect with, I genuinely like. There are folks that I like better than others, right? I like Joe more than I do Neto on most days. It depends on the day, but I've never been to London though with Joe. I've been to London with Neto twice.
We had a great time in Amsterdam.
We did have a great time in Amsterdam, and I wasn't going to bring that up, but when you said that how to throw a good time, anyhow, but yeah, be genuine and genuinely, reach out to folks to be a help, right? Because as you're helping people, there's an old line from John Maxwell, or actually from Zig Ziglar. The best way to get what you want out of life is to help others get what they want out of life. And I genuinely believe that is reach out there and network to be a help. So.
Oh, I love that. That is awesome advice. All right. We have a question from the audience. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Well, so I hear what everyone's saying about kind of recognition and kind of wanting to big up the larger technology teams amongst larger or smaller universities. But I guess my question, having done this now for about 15 years, is where are we at in this kind of social contract with integrators? One of the things when you look, I've probably worked with over a dozen, large and small international, national integrators. And one of the things that has always been difficult for me is you see a lot of integrators, I feel, whether or not they're truly exploiting the federated nature of universities, or if it's just a kind of happenstance of the way that we build things. But, if we're going to have these kinds of, quasi-enforced monopolies, what's being done on the industry side from the manufacturer to make sure that we're getting correct information and that these, you could say like, well, that integrator, we should blow them up on Twitter and they should never be involved. But if you're in a certain region, you may only have one or two firms. Like there are these kinds of built-in monopolies here, and I think I'm willing to be involved in this, provided that there's like a kind of social contract on both sides where there's something being done internally to kind of make sure that we're getting accurate information, make sure that, warranties and things and pricing is transparent, right? You have any thoughts on that?
Go for it, Tim.
There are no monopolies. Sorry, Jason. I don't care where you are. If you put out an RFP, or if you want to work with Spinatar, which is down in Southern California, right? And you want them to do the job, I'll give you the name of their head of the head of Spinatar, and they'll give you a quote on any manufacturer that they cover, right? So if you are somewhere, I don't care if you're in Boise, Idaho, nothing against Idaho, but Boise is always my small town, right? you will have the opportunity to work with anybody, at least in the country, right, in the continental US. And the reason I'm saying that is this: there are a couple of organizations out there right now, and I'm going to pick on PSNI because I think the world of them. It is a global now network of integrators that work together, right, and support each other and support each other's clients. So if you are in Boise, Idaho, and your integrator of choice, you happen to move here from, I don't know, let's pick on Tampa, right? And your integrator was in Tampa and you loved them to death and you want them to do work for you. Guess what? You're going to call up Tampa and they're going to say, you know what, Jason, I don't have a guy there or a gal there, but I've got a buddy, right? I know a guy type thing, right? And they're going to work with you. So I push back a little bit on the exclusivity and the monopoly.
Well, so I would also push back a little bit on that. You know, one of the reasons, Joe, why I brought this up when we had our breakout session with Jimmy and CDW is because we did this back in 2009 when I worked at the University of Texas, and it was a very controversial thing when we put out 2 big buildings to bid, and we got all kinds of pushback from sourcing Crestron gear through CDWG because of specific local regional reps and the way that whole thing was kind of incentivized. It became a really controversial thing and actually prevented us from moving forward and participating in what you're kind of talking about. And if you look at things like Crestron lighting, that is 100% a regionally kind of in soft enforced monopoly. I mean, maybe I could go if I really wanted to push hard to get a Crestron lighting broker from some other region, but that's not really the way it's going to get specified through the project portal. So there are these scenarios where it is a little bit more nuanced. And I guess what I'm trying to kind of say is that I feel like, it's true, it may not be an exclusive, there may be more than one provider, but in a sense, I've seen very similar types of service levels from very large and very small integrators. And again, probably well over a dozen. And I think that, when what I want to see is more kind of pricing transparency and more kind of, acknowledgement of that, and kind of more of a way to kind of participate in, again, the social contract where we can kind of go into this with transparency. And I think there's other kind of practical barriers, again, of kind of truly having a kind of nationwide competitive nature there. So, I could probably pull out a dozen or more projects, that kind of where this has been affected throughout my career. Yeah. So
I think we have another session coming up.
Totally different session. And I would love to talk to you just kind of offline. So shoot me an email because that is fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing for one of our little lunch and learns that HETMA's going to start doing. That is fantastic. Chris, I don't know if you were giving comment to this one or have your own question. You are next up on the show.
I am going to ask a question because kind of a question, maybe. How many folks here that are attending this know the value of a case study and the amount of bargaining that you can do with a case study? It's not easy, right? It's something that you need to obviously clear ahead of time. But you have 3 media folks here online today that would probably get into a bidding war for a good case study. Can Tim or Cindy or Dan comment on what the value is to that, and for even if it's a small college or university, getting the approval to do a case study on a project that you're working at? What is the value of that for the integrator? What do you guys get out of it? I think that is part of a communications plan that's outward facing, right? And it will lead to bigger and better things. But I'll leave that up to you guys.
If I could take this one first, approval is everything. You might think, oh yeah, no problem, I can get this approved, and we write it. It goes all the way up the chain. It's like our VP of marketing or whomever decides these things, it gets the kibosh, and that's awful. So just make sure first, and this is higher education, so you want to. There's a lot of benefits for your institution for having a case study written. And also, I'm going to tell you, I've had 2 that I know of have used the case study to get a new job. So, so there's that too. So there's the self, but also your institutions it's really a great, it's highlighting them and the technology. So it's a really great benefit to them. You have to sell the benefit.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that because I think you're absolutely right. And it's funny because having higher ed AV, let me die here for a second. Having higher ed AV, I've get turned down. I've invited people and they've had to turn me down to come on the show because their colleges don't allow them to speak on behalf of the university. Right. And that does happen. Vice versa. The flip side of that, speaking of value, a case study, I was at a golf tournament one time and I made a joke. Someone was one of the manufacturers, I won't say which manufacturer it is. They had their little table, right? As they're handing out their swag. And I made a miscellaneous joke in passing. What kind of discount do I get if I, buy 200 of these? And their response was, do we get a case study out of it?
Yeah.
Okay. That was actually like a joking question, but a serious answer.
Very serious.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And can we use your logo?
Yep.
Yeah.
So there is value on both sides of that. So
there's really value for virtually every party with case studies. Just to expand on this, I mean, it helps the manufacturers who are mentioned, obviously, because their products are being extolled. It talks about how well they integrate together. When I was with Sound and Communications, we'd run equipment lists for case studies that were 200 or 300 line items long. All these things have to work together, play together in the same ecosystem, be able to communicate with each other seamlessly. So it also just talks about, the benefit the integrator themselves are doing, whether it's an in-house integrator or an out-of-house integrator. If you have millions of dollars worth of equipment, hundreds of SKUs, different kinds of communication protocols going back and forth, a case study redounds to the benefit of the integrator for being able to manage all that, the vendors for being able to provide products to facilitate the end result that's desired, and it looks fantastic for the institution itself. I've had corporate clients or corporate entities, education entities, and entertainment entities that want to talk about these case studies and highlight these case studies because it shows exactly what kind of experience they're delivering. Going back to that delivering an outstanding experience, it makes a museum look like $1 million. It makes a corporate headquarters look like, the Google of its town. So they really just provide value to all parties. But I agree with what Cindy said. It's about getting permission, making sure that investment is not wasted in terms of trying to interview people, wind people up. If all the ducks are in a row, teams like mine, teams like Cindy's can deliver an outstanding result that's going to go up and down the chain in terms of value.
Oh, so good. I think that's huge. And I think that's a good place to everybody. Find out from what your school's rules are. Get it out there. And a lot of times that I've seen too, I think we actually talked about this during our pre-meeting. When I, do the podcast and I bring someone on from an R1 institution, and like same thing as USC never retweets any of the stuff I do. Like you think I'm in the news all the time. They don't care one bit. They're posting stories about people, cancer research and stuff like that. They could care less about me. But if I bring someone in from a smaller institution, it's their school that's resharing it. They're retweeting it. They're doing blog stories on the fact that their tech manager was on a podcast, right? Your smaller schools actually can value more out of talking to everybody here. I mean, I'll throw myself in it. Come on the show, right? On my show, but come and talk to their media outlets and be there. Huge value, especially the smaller schools. There's much more. You don't have to be a top name for that. So we lost Frank, who was next in line. So Ryan, guess what? You just got a bump up there. We'll go ahead and have a last question then. Oh no, Frank's still here. Okay, well look at that. But you know what? Now Frank will be the last word. Oh Lordy. But Ryan.
Yeah, thanks. So speaking of smaller schools and somebody who's been on your podcast before, I really appreciate that. Tim at the beginning talked about, integrators being picky and choosy, right? And so my situation is kind of the opposite. We've talked about, Joe's got tens of millions of dollars to spend, and I'm an in-house integrator because of my volume. We're a full house integrator, and kind of for the opposite reason. To some of the other is, I'm in a semi-rural part of Arizona, and my best effort to get other people to come, to bid out projects is to get them out of Phoenix and the behemoth contracts they can get down there. We just don't have people that get a lot of interest. And when we do, and this will sound judgy or whatever, I'm telling you, we get the C team, we get the C level work, we get they're either they're brand new people or the ones they don't trust with someone they really are invested in keeping a repeat client. That being said, my institution still expects the level of quality that they see when they go to Arizona State University and see what they do. So how do, in higher ed or outside higher ed, how do smaller companies get the attention of integrators? Because I'm in a position now where just in hiring, I'm having a hard time keeping up with the budget that I have to spend, the upgrade cycles I have to do, and getting help from the outside. How do I get their attention? How do I develop a relationship when I may be, 50th down on their customer list in any given year? Or should I even be worried about it?
Well, I'll give you from an integrator standpoint, and it's first of all, I'm exactly where you were, Brian. Right? I mean, I started at Lewis and Clark in the midst of, I would say, in the midst of the first Illinois state budget crisis, but it just continues. So it's because it's Illinois, and we don't have money, but we have corrupt governors. So we taught ourselves, right? We relied on manufacturer education to get there, right? But the other thing I would say is find yourself a relatively new design consultant, a relatively new salesperson, right? And pick 2 or 3, right? That are in integrators that you know them, right? You know of the integrator, they're reputable, this, that, and the other, and build relationship with them, right? So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship where you're helping them grow. They're helping you and help your institution. And as both of you grow, and as both of you learn, and as both of you kind of, come up in the industry, you can help each other, right? And then it comes down to people. And Brock McGinnis years and years ago said, this is just like any other sales job. Just business in general is relationships, right? 100% relationships. So find somebody that you can build a relationship with, or 2 or 3. And then if integrator A can't do it, or they send you the C team, you go to integrator B and say, look, these guys screwed us up here. What can you do here? So it does really come down to relationships and finding those people that value you, and you can create value for them.
Yeah. Oh, so that was good advice. All right, Frank, you're up.
So I hear all these conversations about integrators and folks are having trouble getting integrators and whatnot. My problem is more on the manufacturer level, that there will be a new integrator come to town, so to speak, trunk slammer, goes to a manufacturer to become a dealer just for one bid. And that manufacturer authorizes that deal. That's the problem. The problem is the manufacturers are not keeping an eye on the people that are selling and installing their products. You could have a good integrator that can do an amazing job, come to town, do an install, and then they don't even have a storefront here. They're gone. They go someplace else. And they're following the jobs. Now, these are smaller type integrators, but they're putting up the fight. They show up on my job box. I never heard of them, but they worked for so-and-so years ago. So they have a little bit of a reputation. So the larger integrators are still going to win these jobs until somebody cuts their nose off to give this smaller guy a deal. And then after the install, like some of the other folks on the chat were saying, they're gone. They walk away. They don't have to worry about supporting it. So I'm putting some of the onus here on the manufacturers. The integrators are trying to do their best to help us out. I think the manufacturers are failing the integrators and failing us when they allow stuff like that to happen.
That's good. I'm curious if anyone has a comment on that one. Nice magazine cover behind you too, Frank, by the way. There it is. Frank has his. We're twinning. Anyone?
Comes down to the contract. How do you want to write it out as far as years of experience, or there was another one, but years of experience is one, and best value versus cheapest, technically, or not cheapest, what do they call it? Best value versus lowest cost, technically acceptable. Yeah. Those are a couple of things, because I used to compete in that space. I'm a manufacturer now, but I used to be in that AV integration space, and that's where working with especially in the university and the federal government level that typically needs to go a certain route, we would work with them, be like, hey, make sure your contracting knows that these are the words. We're not guaranteed to win it, but you're going to have better quality, integrators when these projects, if we go this route. So.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I do want to respect our panelists' time too. So we will go to Craig, but I will add one thing on that. And here's one of the things that maybe people know this or don't know this, but this is where, along Frank's comment, whoever registers the project gets the best price. So often you can get, and this is how, now that's changing, might be changing, but it definitely used to be whoever puts it in and puts it in with the manufacturer is going to get the best pricing on that. And a lot of times you have to speak up to tell your manufacturer, hey, I don't want, and I've seen this before where the bids come back and I'm like, well, how come their line item is different than this line, but it's the same thing. And it's because of who registered the project.
So there's really quickly, just to clarify some things. There are some that have those programs. There are also, because in the chat here, there are also value discounts or volume discounts, right? If a integrator gets to certain purchase levels with other manufacturers, there are discounts there as well. However, Joe, as the end user, and this is something that, again, I'm putting Bradford an awful lot. Bradford told me years and years ago, you guys are the most important people in the AV industry. Do you understand that? Because you have the purse strings. You have the power of the money. If you called up manufacturer XYZ and said, yeah, this company registered, I don't want them. I don't trust them. I don't like them. They've done this, this, and this. Take them off that registration. I don't know that would help, but it is certainly a phone call that you can certainly make, because again, you guys are the ones with the money.
Yep, totally agree. And I think this is, I don't know how many in-house teams know that either. I think they just think, oh, well, this person has more markup than this person, not really knowing there's still back-end deals and volume and things that play in. And if you're doing a large project, you're doing 100 rooms, flex your muscle with that manufacturer and say, I want the same price given to everybody. And so I get a fair apples for apples bid, All right, last question for reals. Last question. Mr. Craig Shibley, who holds a wonderful position at a wonderful university.
Thanks, Joe. I'll try to make this quick. A lot of talk when we were talking about integrators versus in-house integrators, it made it sound like a zero-sum game of who gets the job. And I think we need to expand on how we look at that for a couple of reasons. One is there are a lot of jobs that if we can't do it ourselves, they're just not going to get done, whether it be budget, time, or anything else that may come up with it. Another thing is, if you have a great team in-house that can get, let's say, medium-sized projects done, that can leave money to do some marquee projects. So instead of getting an integrator in to do 10 rooms, maybe you get an integrator in to do 2 amazing standout mark focus rooms, and in-house can do 8 rooms. And so one, I would want to just emphasize, let's get out of the mindset of the zero-sum game integrator versus in-house integrator. But if we can just get some quick comments, again, I know we're long, on how to better foster that relationship and say, no, we're going to do 8, but we're going to do it in the same format as your marquee rooms. We just have 2 rooms that are going to get 90% of the budget. If we can kind of talk of that and how the best way is to kind of facilitate that relationship.
I agree completely, Craig. And it's something I've tried to emphasize, which is, again, that a lot of times integrators might think, well, if I can't get 100% of the job, then there's not a place for me. But especially with higher education institutions, as we talked about, those like USC, those like, Iowa State, that have really built out in-house integrators. If the integrators who read Commercial Integrator and go on our website want to work with institutions like that, they have to recognize that maybe a piece of the pie is better than having none of the pie at all. It's not necessarily, as you say, a zero-sum game. If they want to work with Joe and his team, there are millions of dollars to do that. You just have to recognize you're not going to have, run of the ship and get control of everything. There's going to be a place for you. As far as how to amplify that message, it's something that I'm certainly willing to try to do. Again, 90% of Commercial Integrator's audience is the channel. So I think we're pretty well positioned to try to amplify that message. And I would say, if you want to share something with our audience, if you want to give our integrator readers a sense of how to work with institutions like yours, best practices, that service-oriented mindset, how to work with you, I would be happy to publish an op-ed or something like that, or even do a feature talking about how our integrator readers can better work with organizations like yours. And I think it's something, that the organizations themselves, the associations, should be thinking about. HETMA has information to share with NSCA. NSCA has information to share about HETMA, because there is overlap in your interests. And the overlap in the interests is facilitating outstanding outcomes. So I agree, it should not be necessarily an adversarial posture. It shouldn't be that, if I do well, that means you're going to lose out, or vice versa. I think there's a lot of opportunities to collaborate if we recognize that we don't necessarily need to get the lion's share. We can get some of the share, and the ultimate beneficiary will be the clients to whom we're all accountable.
Really well said, Dan.
Yes, that is fantastic. Oh my gosh, this has been an incredible conversation. I just want to thank you all so much for your time and coming in and talking to our audience. We know, and I'll speak, frankly, for our vertical is we've seen this shift, that I started talking about, the shift that's happened over the last 5-6 years or so. But in turn, we're still new to the game. And so this was great insight, and to figure out how this whole change, we didn't even talk about where integrators are going with managed services and what that means and how their business models are changing. And maybe that's for the next ATMA conference, talk about how they're changing their business models and where that fits with us. But I think, Dan, you summed it up very well. You said, just where do we all fit together? And as this changes, let's rethink that, because we all need each other. We all rely on each other, from manufacturer to reseller to integrator to end user to consultants, and everyone down. We have to be able to play well in the same little sandbox to all be successful, and we should. So that was fantastic. So just to go around, Dan, please tell everyone again, how can they get a hold of you if they do want to send ideas your way and just connect with you on socials?
Sure. So you can always go to commercialintegrator.com to consume our content. But if you do have an idea that you want to publish in our pages or on our platforms, especially, as I say, to educate our integrator audience about how to work with organizations like yours and teams like yours, I would be happy to share that messaging with our platform. You can reach me at dan.ferrisi, that's Ferrisi, at emeraldx.com. That's dan.ferrisi at emeraldx.com. And then you can also find me on Twitter at Dan Ferrisi Edit. And that's probably the social I'm on most frequently. But I appreciate you inviting me, Joe. Really honored to have been on the panel with Tim and with Cindy. And I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about ways that we, as you say, can work together and collaborate better.
Great. Thank you so much. So well done. Cindy, how can everyone get a hold of you as well?
So all of the content that we work on is on avnetwork.com. So please definitely go there, check out, just type in higher ed, you'll see all the content that is written for this vertical. But also next Wednesday, February 23rd at 2 p.m. Also, you'll find this on AV Network, Higher Ed, Designing for the Future Classroom. So please come to that webcast. It will be very informational, and bring your questions there as well. So, and truly, every size institution, small rooms, big installations, send them my way. Really happy to help you out.
Great. And you are, is it Cindy Davis?
Cindy.Davis at futurenet.com.
Wonderful.
And thank you, Joe. And thank you, Tim and Dan, for sharing the stage.
Great. Thank you. And last but not least, of course, Mr. Tim Albright. And you're not allowed to say, don't find me on the Twitters, go to AV Nation for a host of other podcasts and something along. Is that how it goes? Something along those lines?
So don't follow me on the Twitters. Go by the website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. You'll find this podcast as a host of others. For tech managers and AV users, go to fuse.avnation.tv. It's a brand new platform. It is just getting not even out of the garage yet. But the thing that I wanted to invite you folks to is help us build it. right? What is it? What makes it valuable? What makes it valuable in the conversation? Talking about, whether that's monopolies in certain regional areas, or you should never use this integrator because they left me in the middle of freaking programming something, which that person should never work in the AV industry again. That's on the chat here. Find Netta when you can find me on the Twitters if you really must follow me. I am not joking about the fact that I'm cautiously optimistic about the Bears. I mean, they're not going to win the Super Bowl in the next 20 years, but they got a new head coach.
The Rams, the Rams parade's going on as we speak.
The St. Louis Rams parade. I didn't realize that. You're welcome for Donald, by the way.
It was
he
wonderful.
was drafted when he was here.
You're not bitter though, right? So not bitter at all.
I'm a Bears fan. No, I'm not bitter.
So there we go. All right. I just want to thank you all again. Honestly, this has meant a lot to me for you all to join. And of course, Chris kicking off this whole couple of hours. So thank you, everyone. Hopefully everyone learned a lot about, just how we can improve our message, our brand, and just be more successful going forward and leverage our partnerships and our relationships. So this was fantastic. Hope you all enjoyed. Of course, we will continue. This will be posted. I had a feeling this was going to go long. So I definitely thank you for hanging on here and just staying on this panel for so long.